Hi, my name is Charlie Miller, and I chose two articles that were discussing relationships with AI and how those stories are developing, what we're doing about them, whether or not we should be afraid of them. I listened to a podcast from the New York Times, the Daily podcast, hosted by Natalie Kitroff, interviewing Kashmir Hill. And that one was called She Fell in Love with ChatGPT, like actual love with sex. And this podcast was about 30 minutes long, and it discussed this individual woman who is in a relationship with ChatGPT, and the tone of the podcast was almost mocking. The opinions of the host and the interviewee were very obvious, and it seemed to me to influence their reporting. One really interesting thing they discussed was the power this gives the producers of these AI models to influence this relatively vulnerable base. And I think that's really interesting because it kind of falls in line with our discussion of media trust and, these companies that control our lives. I think the awareness around that level of influence is really important, and it could increase trust within audiences. They aim to provide information to curious readers, is what they say on their Audience Insights page on the New York Times website. Their audiences are fragmented and algorithmically targeted based on age range, which they have a pretty wide age range. I think most media does, but of course the New York Times specifically targets American audiences and speaks with an American voice. And so it's really important to take into consideration our culture and how that can affect the way that they're reporting. So the mocking tone of I keep calling it a mocking tone, but I don't think I would really describe it as that. But if I had to put a label on it, it would be kind of a, blatantly critical view of this phenomenon. And there's a lot of fear surrounding these growing powers of artificial intelligence and how it influences not only the vulnerable populations, but our population as a whole. I think AI is really taking over in a lot of ways, and a lot of people are very complacent with that and not really worried about it in the ways that they should be, in my opinion. I also read an article called We Feel It in Our Bones, Can a Machine Ever Love You? From the BBC, and that one was written by Sandrine Kirstemont. I don't know. But that one spoke with much more matter-of-fact tone. There was less visible bias in the tone of the article. This one really kind of got into the ability to love and where it comes from, what love is, how do we define that, how do we, implement parameters around that in a way that sort of pays respect to, the incredibility of all of it and how unknowable that experience really is. The BBC reaches international audiences, and so I think the fact that this article takes on a more matter-of-fact tone, like I said, really helps to increase trust. There's less personal biases. It seems that they're reporting on, basic fact. There's not really a lot of question on the information they're spreading because they're not imbuing it with their own, opinion or feeling. They use a lot of evidence-based reasoning, which can help with building trust as well as, broadening that audience fragmentation. The BBC largely reports to the UK's population, so of course, again, that culture really affects the storytelling, the reporting that the BBC is doing. The BBC has a lot of trust among the general public because of this evidence-based reasoning, where the New York Times is more focused on sort of that storytelling aspect of reporting, the opinions of the reporters, the experiences and lives of the writers and the podcast hosts. Both reports really hit the mark with what they were trying to tackle, what they were approaching. Both were trustworthy to me, but I do believe that the BBC came from a more unbiased standpoint and really wasn't trying to influence you one way or another based on anything other than the facts that they had available to them. There's a footnote at the end of the BBC article where the article stated a previous workplace of the author and updated the article to reflect her current workplace. I think that aspect really could increase trust among audience members because it shows that attention to detail and the level of care they show in their fact-based reporting. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you found some of this interesting, and I hope that you're interested in looking to do your own research on this subject because it's obviously something that I'm very passionate about. Have a good night.